Right. But we had a huge setback this year in New York State where Governor Cuomo forced the legislature to make the vote tests far more difficult. And I say he forced them. He put it in the ballot in the budget bill, and the state legislature had to pass the budget. It would have been terrible for New York State to not have a budget. So they couldn't vote against it, but he raised the vote test from 50,000 votes for governor, which you just have to worry about every 4 years, to you have to get 2% of the vote for governor. And also, if it's a presidential year, you have to get 2% for president. So here the Libertarian Party finally got qualified status in New York State for the first time in 2018. But now, if Joe Jorgensen doesn't get 2% of the vote, the party will go off the ballot. And furthermore, in New York State, there's no easy way to get back on. There is no petition in New York to qualify a new party. Instead, all they have are candidate petitions. So if the Libertarian Party goes off the ballot in 2020 because it doesn't get 2% of the vote for Joe, if it wanted to run a full slate of candidates in 2022, it would have to have probably 1 million signatures because you have to have separate petition for each of your nominees. So by the time you have 3,500 signatures for all 27 of your U.S. House candidates and almost as many for all your state Senate candidates and about a third of that for your assembly, and then dozens and dozens of partisan local offices. I haven't figured it out, but I bet it would be at least 500,000 signatures.
That is insane.
That's in court right now, so it might be struck down.
Fingers crossed, because I mean, it's crazy to think though that the narrative around voting has become very dichotomous between the two major parties. And when you look at a state like New York, it's very blue. But if you try to tell a Democrat to vote for your candidate, like purely on Democratic reasons, just to keep that option on the ballot, I mean, it seems like you ask them to kill their firstborn child almost.
Especially this year. It is so hypocritical of Governor Cuomo and other leading Democrats to say, please, please, at least this year, don't vote for a third party candidate for president. There's too much at stake. And that's a very convincing message that I agree with, really. But, and at the same time, to change the law to say you have to do well in the presidential vote or we throw you off the ballot, when the old law didn't require any particular showing for president at all. And the whole Governor Cuomo's excuse for this, making it more difficult for parties to stay in the ballot, was that he wants to have public funding. And if we had public funding and too many parties in the ballot, that would cost the state treasury too much money. That is totally hypocritical, because New York's in the Second Circuit, and the Second Circuit already ruled that it's constitutional to have a public funding law that discriminates in favor of the Democratic and Republican parties and against all the others. So even though I was very disappointed when the Second Circuit ruled that way, that's the reality. And it's utter hypocrisy for New York State's governor to say, well, we have to get rid of the minor parties because it'll cost too much money for the public funding, when he knows, or he ought to know, that is not true. You don't need to fund the minor parties with public funding.